How did a penniless runaway teenager, with nothing but ink on his hands and a few copper coins in his pocket, rise to tame the terrifying power of lightning and forever alter the map of the modern world? Step out of the modern rush and onto the rain-slicked cobblestones of 18th century Philadelphia. The rhythmic, hypnotic clatter of a wooden printing press echoes through the misty evening streets. It is wonderful to have you joining us on this journey tonight. Before we get started, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Take a deep breath, settle into your favorite spot. Let the burdens of the day fade away as we prepare to step back in time. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, we journey into the brilliant, restless mind of an American titan. The narrative gently lowers you into the candlelit workshop of Josiah Franklin. We smoothly begin the tale of a restless young boy destined for greatness. Our story begins in the bitter winter of 1706. A sharp, cold sea breeze was blowing off the Boston harbor. The icy wind howled through the narrow, twisting dirt streets of the Puritan settlement. It was the 17th of January. A boy was born into a bustling, incredibly crowded home. His name was Benjamin. He was the 15th of 17 children in the massive Franklin family. The small wooden house was always filled with a chaotic symphony of noise and constant motion. Finding a quiet corner was nearly impossible. His father was an imposing, hard-working man named Josiah. Josiah was a tallow chandler by trade. He made candles and soap for the growing colonial town. The shop was a dark, difficult, and foul-smelling place to work. The pungent, heavy scent of boiling tallow and lye hung in the damp air. It was a thick, greasy smell that clung to the skin and clothes. Young Benjamin spent his early days surrounded by massive, bubbling vats of animal fat. He absolutely hated the tedious, smelly work of candle making. He yearned for something far beyond the boiling pots and endless wicks. Josiah recognized the bright, undeniable spark of genius in his young son. Hoping to guide the boy toward the clergy, he sent Benjamin to the Boston Latin School. The young boy loved to learn. He devoured every single lesson presented to him. But the formal education lasted only 2 short years. The family finances were stretched far too thin to continue paying the tuition. Benjamin had to return to the family trade of soap and candles. But this was only the beginning of his true education. The boy possessed an insatiable, burning hunger for words and ideas. He spent every spare copper coin he could find on acquiring new books. The flickering weak glow of a single tallow candle illuminated his stolen books at midnight. He read in secret while the large house slept deeply around him. He studied poetry, navigation, arithmetic, and the great philosophers. At age 12, his path shifted entirely and forever. He was legally bound as an apprentice to his older brother. James Franklin was a stern, ambitious, and demanding master. James had just founded a brand new newspaper called the New England Courant. It was a revolutionary publication for its time. It was the first truly independent newspaper in the American colonies. The busy print shop was a brilliant revelation to young Benjamin. He loved the rough texture of cheap, fibrous paper under his ink-stained fingertips. He learned to meticulously set the lead type, letter by tiny letter. He listened carefully to the heavy, metallic thud of the printing press block coming down on fresh paper. It was the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of his entirely new world. Benjamin desperately wanted to write his own words for the newspaper, but James would never allow a mere apprentice to publish articles. So, Benjamin devised a clever, highly secretive plan to bypass his brother. He began writing humorous letters under a fake, perfectly crafted name. He called himself Silenced Dog Good. She was a fictional, highly opinionated, and fiercely independent widow. He slipped these handwritten letters under the heavy print shop door late at night. The Silenced Dog Good letters were highly popular among the townspeople. They were published 14 separate times, to great, resounding acclaim. The whole town constantly wondered who this witty, rebellious widow could possibly be. James was absolutely thrilled with the sudden surge in his newspaper readership. Then, unexpected trouble suddenly struck the Corinth. James was arrested and jailed for a full month for daring to criticize the powerful local government. The busy paper was left completely without a publisher or editor. Benjamin boldly stepped up and ran the paper brilliantly in his brother's absence. He kept the heavy wooden presses rolling and the town fully informed. Eventually, the great secret was accidentally revealed. James finally discovered that his little brother Benjamin was the famous Silenced Dog Good. James did not celebrate his younger brother's incredible writing talent. Instead, the older brother became deeply, bitterly resentful of the praise Benjamin had received. The older brother turned to harsh physical abuse. He beat Benjamin severely for his insubordination and cleverness. The stifling, oppressive environment of the shop became completely unbearable. His brother's cruelty sparked a deep, burning desperation in the young teenager's heart. Benjamin knew he could no longer stay trapped in Boston. The daily abuse led naturally into his daring, incredibly risky plan to escape. He needed total freedom at any absolute cost. Running away from an apprenticeship was a very serious crime. It was a strict criminal offense in colonial America. A runaway apprentice could be hunted down by the law and severely punished. But Benjamin was only 17 years old and utterly desperate for a new life. It was the autumn of 1723. He decided to risk absolutely everything for a fragile chance at genuine freedom. He secretly boarded a large wooden ship that was bound for New York. He hid himself away quietly as the vessel departed the familiar harbor. The rhythmic creaking of the wooden ship's hull echoed against the dark, churning ocean. He listened to the heavy waves crashing violently against the thick wooden planks. He was entirely alone, sailing bravely toward a completely unknown future. He eventually arrived in New York, hoping to find immediate work as a skilled printer. But the small, developing town offered absolutely no opportunities for him. There was simply no need for another runaway apprentice in the local shops. Benjamin did not let this setback fill him with dark despair. He learned of a working printing press located much further south. He bravely set out on foot toward the distant province of Pennsylvania. He walked 50 grueling miles across the rough, unforgiving terrain of New Jersey. The long journey was physically exhausting and deeply lonely. He heard the soft crunch of fallen leaves under his worn leather shoes. He walked for several days through the quiet, damp autumn forests. His immediate destination was the small riverside town of Burlington. From there, he urgently needed to cross the wide, flowing water. He joined a weary group of fellow travelers on a small, fragile boat. They rowed the small boat slowly down the Delaware River to finally reach Philadelphia. He willingly took a long turn at the heavy, blister-inducing wooden oars. He listened to the gentle lapping of the Delaware River against the sides of the small wooden rowboat. He finally arrived in Philadelphia in October of 1723. It was a bleak, miserable, and overwhelmingly gray morning. He was utterly exhausted and completely soaked to the bone from the heavy, relentless rain. He felt the damp, clinging chill of rain-soaked wool clothes on his shivering body. He was a complete stranger standing in a strange, sprawling city. His deep pockets were terribly, frighteningly empty. His entire net worth upon arrival was a single Dutch silver dollar. He also carried a few small, nearly worthless copper pennies. He was painfully hungry, deeply tired, and completely unknown to the world. But his heart soared because he was finally free from his abusive brother forever. He wandered the unfamiliar, muddy streets, desperately looking for cheap food. The warm, comforting aroma of freshly baked bread wafted into the damp street. He followed the delicious, intoxicating scent to a busy local baker. He asked the man for whatever 3 pennies could possibly buy. The friendly baker handed him 3 massive, incredibly puffy bread rolls. They were much larger than the customary bread he knew back in Boston. He tucked one large roll safely under each arm. He walked slowly down Market Street while actively eating the 3rd roll. He made a very clumsy, highly awkward, and truly pathetic sight. A young woman named Deborah Reed watched him curiously from her open doorway. She thought he appeared entirely ridiculous and quite funny. She laughed softly at the disheveled boy with his arms completely full of bread. Little did she know, she was actually laughing at her future husband. Benjamin ignored the strange stares and focused entirely on his immediate survival. He soon found steady work as a journeyman printer. His new employer was an eccentric man named Samuel Kimmer. Kimmer was an unusual man who kept a very messy, chaotic printing shop. Benjamin quickly proved his vastly superior mechanical skills to his new boss. He carefully reorganized the chaotic printing house from top to bottom. His undeniable talent did not go unnoticed in the rapidly growing city. Even the powerful governor of Pennsylvania took a sudden, surprising interest in the boy. Sir William Keith was a man composed of grand words and incredibly empty promises. He falsely promised to set the young Franklin up in his very own printing business. Benjamin foolishly believed the wealthy governor and eagerly prepared for a grand overseas adventure. Having secured a solid foothold in this new, bustling city, his natural ambition quickly drove him forward. Benjamin bravely traveled across the vast ocean to London in 1724. He was eagerly expecting important letters of credit from Governor Keith. He truly believed these promised letters would finally buy him his own expensive printing equipment. But the crucial letters never actually arrived at the docks. The young, hopeful man was utterly stranded in a massive, overwhelming foreign city. He was deeply disappointed, but he was certainly not defeated by this betrayal. He quickly found excellent work in the highly elite London printing houses. He stepped wide-eyed into a massive world of huge industrial presses. He heard the deafening, rhythmic clatter of the bustling London printing districts. It was a beautiful, overwhelming symphony of relentless industry and modern progress. Here, he masterfully learned highly advanced, complex typesetting techniques. He learned directly from the absolute finest, most experienced printers in the entire world. He breathed in the rich, oily smell of fresh black ink being rolled onto metal type. He endlessly honed his precise craft until he was a true, undeniable master. He carefully saved his hard-earned money and patiently waited for a chance to go home. That rare chance finally came with a kind merchant named Thomas Denham. Denham happily hired Benjamin as a dedicated clerk and generously paid for his long passage back. He returned triumphantly to Philadelphia in the year 1726. He worked diligently and quietly in the dry mercantile business for a while. But the powerful magnetic lure of the printing press never truly left his brilliant mind. By 1728, he finally returned to his true destined calling. He proudly opened his very own printing shop in a strategic partnership with a man named Hugh Meredith. Just a year later, in 1729, Franklin made an incredibly bold, decisive move. He bravely purchased a struggling, failing newspaper called the Pennsylvania Gazette. He rapidly transformed it into a massive, undeniable, and highly profitable success. His complicated personal life was also finally taking a solid shape. In 1730, he happily reunited with the very woman who had laughed at him years before. He married his childhood acquaintance, Deborah Reed, in a legally binding common-law marriage. They carefully built a strong, incredibly enduring, and highly practical partnership. Together, they efficiently ran the busy shop and steadily expanded their growing influence. Benjamin eventually became the highly respected official printer for the entire province of Pennsylvania. He printed vastly important government documents and complex regional laws. He even printed the colony's vital paper money. He truly loved the crisp, clean snap of freshly printed paper money being neatly stacked. His growing business was rapidly thriving, far beyond his wildest childhood dreams. But he cared deeply about much more than just accumulating personal wealth. He passionately wanted to improve himself and elevate his entire community. In 1727, he officially formed an intellectual group called the Junto. It was a dedicated mutual improvement club designed for ambitious, curious young tradesmen. They gathered happily in warm, dimly lit tavern corners on Friday nights. The Junto Club eagerly debated grand philosophy over tall, frothy pints of ale. They freely shared rare books and highly complex philosophical ideas. This deep love of shared communal knowledge sparked a truly brilliant, revolutionary idea. He quickly realized that imported books were far too expensive for most average working men to own. So, he brilliantly created the very first subscription library in America. It was proudly called the Library Company of Philadelphia. Officially founded in 1731, the dedicated members pooled their scarce money to buy vast collections of books from England. He absolutely loved the heavy leather bindings and the dusty scent of imported books in the new library. It was a glorious, quiet temple of learning created specifically for the common man. His sharp business acumen was just as fiercely powerful as his brilliant intellect. His vast printing network rapidly expanded across the various American colonies. He cleverly created highly strategic, lucrative franchise partnerships with other ambitious printers. With the printing press as his powerful platform, he sought to reach the masses directly. This driving ambition led naturally to his most famous, enduring literary creation. The very first edition of Poor Richard's Almanac was published in late December of 1732. It was a massive, exhausting undertaking for the incredibly busy print shop. Franklin cleverly wrote the entire publication under a brand new, highly amusing pseudonym. He called himself Richard Saunders. Richard was intentionally written as a slightly dull but incredibly lovable and highly relatable astrologer. The handy almanac was an absolutely essential, vital tool for rough colonial life. It provided critically important, highly anticipated weather forecasts for anxious local farmers. It contained detailed astronomical data and highly practical, everyday household tips. Setting the lead type for these incredibly complex pages was agonizing, painstaking work. It required the meticulous, microscopic placement of metal letters to form the daily tide charts. But the famous almanac was much more than a simple, boring calendar. It became wildly famous for its highly witty, incredibly memorable aphorisms. Franklin cleverly adapted many of these famous sayings from ancient classic literature and obscure proverbs. He skillfully rewrote them to be sharp, punchy, and incredibly easy to remember. He desperately wanted to teach vital civic virtues like thrift, honesty, and hard work. Phrases like, "A penny saved is a penny earned," originate directly from these very publications. He packed the narrow margins with clever life advice and highly humorous, biting observations. You could almost clearly see the subtle smirk on a reader's face upon reading a witty, hidden joke in the margins. The gentle humor made the bitter medicine of his moral advice incredibly easy to swallow. The overwhelming response from the colonial public was absolutely, undeniably staggering. The lively, crowded chatter of citizens lining up at the print shop door in December was a wonderful sound. Absolutely everyone wanted the newest, highly anticipated edition of Poor Richard. The warm, golden hue of candlelight reflected off the wooden counter of the shop as silver coins rapidly changed hands. It was a truly glorious, highly profitable time for the ambitious printer. The famous almanac consistently sold up to 10,000 copies every single year. This made it a massive, completely unprecedented literary bestseller for the era. He stubbornly published the popular almanac continuously for 25 long years. The final, legendary edition was proudly printed in 1758. This final version featured a highly famous, brilliant preface called The Way to Wealth. It was a masterful, sweeping compilation of his absolute best financial advice and moral sayings. The Way to Wealth became incredibly famous all around the globe. It quickly became one of the most widely reprinted literary works in early American history. The incredibly wealth generated from the simple almanac changed his entire life completely. It generously allowed Franklin to formally retire from active, daily printing at the young age of 42. The wealth and immense influence garnered from his printing business finally allowed him to step away from the press. He could now freely turn his brilliant, endlessly curious gaze toward the terrifying mysteries of the natural world. As our young printer sets his sights on the mysteries of science, I would love to hear from you. What other historical innovators or inventors would you like us to explore in a future journey? Let me know in the comments below. And as we carefully turn the page to his next grand chapter, let the quiet hum of the evening settle in gently around you. The city of Philadelphia was growing rapidly in the early decades of the 18th century. It was a place of immense opportunity and incredible, bustling trade. But it was also a muddy, dangerous, and incredibly chaotic colonial town. Benjamin Franklin looked at the dark streets and saw a massive puzzle waiting to be brilliantly solved. He firmly believed that a civilized society should actively protect and nurture its citizens. In 1736, he established the Union Fire Company. This was the very first organized volunteer firefighting brigade in all of America. Before this, a single stray spark could easily burn an entire neighborhood to absolute ash. Imagine the chaotic, clanging bells and shouting men of the volunteer fire brigade at midnight. They rushed through the dark streets with heavy leather buckets and sharp axes. But putting out fires was only the very beginning of his grand civic vision. He wanted to cure the sick and mend the broken bodies of the poor. He helped found the Pennsylvania Hospital in 1751. It was a monumental achievement, becoming the first truly public hospital in the American colonies. He introduced a brilliant matching grant system to cleverly fund the massive hospital project. He promised wealthy donors that their private money would be perfectly matched by the colonial assembly. This was an entirely novel, incredibly clever fundraising concept that worked flawlessly. You could soon hear the quiet, sterile echo of the wooden halls in the newly constructed hospital ward. He then turned his practical mind to the filthy, unpaved streets of the growing city. He organized the first municipal street sweeping initiative to clean the thick, foul mud from the main roads. The citizens woke to the rhythmic sweeping of heavy straw brooms against the cobblestone streets at dawn. He also wanted to banish the dangerous, oppressive darkness of the long winter nights. The old imported street lamps were terribly designed and constantly choked with thick black soot. He completely redesigned the street lamps to have simple, flat glass panes and a long funnel at the top. This allowed the heavy smoke to easily escape while letting the bright light shine through. The soft, steady glow of the newly designed street lamps cut beautifully through the thick city fog. To keep the newly lit streets perfectly safe, he proposed another radical idea. He established the first colonial night watchman patrol, officially funded by mandatory property taxes. Thieves and scoundrels learned to fear the heavy thud of the night watchman's staff on the pavement in the dead of night. His beloved city was finally clean, safely illuminated, and well protected. But he also knew that a great city desperately needed to cultivate the human mind. In 1743, he founded the American Philosophical Society to tightly connect brilliant colonial scientists. He was also appointed postmaster of Philadelphia in 1737. Greatly improving daily mail efficiency. He helped establish the Academy and College of Philadelphia, which later became the prestigious University of Pennsylvania. And when dangerous foreign threats loomed, he organized a fierce local militia to defend against privateers during King George's War. Having tamed the chaos of the city streets, his mind naturally wandered to taming the chaos of the skies above them. Benjamin Franklin officially retired from the exhausting printing business in 1748. He was only 42 years old and had secured enough wealth for a very comfortable lifetime. He desperately wanted to focus entirely on the fascinating mysteries of modern science. He eagerly acquired a long glass friction tube from a fellow scientist in Europe to begin his experiments. He stood in a darkened room, vigorously rubbing the glass tube with a piece of dry silk. He watched the sharp, snapping sound of a blue electrical spark jumping from the glass tube. The sharp, metallic smell of ozone lingered heavily in the air after a powerful, static discharge. Electricity was a profound mystery in the 18th century, mostly treated as a simple parlor trick. But Franklin saw the hidden, invisible architecture of the natural universe. He began to coin brand new electrical terms that we still use every single day. He gave us the vital words: battery, charge, positive, and negative. The leading scientific theory of the time falsely claimed that electricity consisted of two entirely separate fluids. He brilliantly proved that electricity was not two separate fluids at all. It was actually a single invisible element present in all solid matter. He realized that rubbing the glass did not magically create electricity. It merely moved the invisible electrical fire from one physical object to another. He then made a truly terrifying, utterly profound mental leap. He boldly proposed that the tiny blue sparks in his parlor were exactly the same as the massive lightning bolts in the sky. He proposed the famous kite experiment in 1752 to conclusively prove lightning was purely electrical. He waited patiently for a massive summer storm to darken the Pennsylvania horizon. He walked out into a wide-open Philadelphia pasture with his adult son, William. The ominous, low rumble of thunder rolled heavily across the dark gray sky. He flew a simple kite made of 2 cedar sticks and a large silk handkerchief. He felt the intense physical tension of the wet hemp string pulling taut against the wind during the kite flight. A metal key was carefully tied to the very bottom of the long, wet string. He stood safely inside a dry wooden shed to protect himself from the deadly current. It is a common, enduring myth that his kite was actually struck by a direct bolt of lightning. If that had happened, he would have been instantly and violently killed. Instead, he merely collected the ambient, invisible static charge from the heavy storm clouds. The electrical fire traveled silently down the wet string and leaped into a special glass container called a Leyden jar. He held the cold, smooth glass of the Leyden jar resting in his steady hands. He had successfully captured the terrifying power of the heavens in a simple glass bottle. This was incredibly, unbelievably dangerous work. A European scientist named George William Richmond was tragically killed trying to replicate the experiment improperly. Richmond failed to ground his equipment and was struck dead by a massive ball of blue lightning. Franklin published his groundbreaking findings in a fascinating book called Experiments and Observations on Electricity. This brilliant work instantly made him a massive international celebrity. The scientific community was absolutely stunned by the genius of the colonial printer. He earned the prestigious Copley Medal from the Royal Society in London, the highest scientific honor of the age. His understanding of this raw power was not just theoretical. He immediately sought a practical way to protect humanity from its utterly destructive force. For centuries, lightning had been viewed as the angry, unavoidable wrath of a punishing god. It routinely struck tall wooden church steeples, causing massive, devastating city fires. Franklin invented the simple, elegant lightning rod in 1752 to safely tame this celestial terror. He placed a thick, pointed iron rod at the very top of a tall building. He insisted that the attached metal wire be grounded deep into the damp earth to safely channel the massive strike. People watched the bright, blinding flash of lightning striking a sharp iron rod atop a church steeple. The terrifying electrical fire was harmlessly guided into the dirt, saving countless buildings from absolute ruin. His brilliant mind was constantly churning with highly practical, everyday solutions. He invented the famous Franklin stove in 1741 to keep colonial homes much warmer. It was a heavy, metal-lined fireplace that radiated heat far more efficiently than an open hearth. The clever stove used a complex baffle to draw hot fumes completely around the room before they escaped up the chimney. You could feel the deep, radiant warmth radiating from the cast iron plates of the Franklin stove on a snowy night. It used a quarter of the wood and provided twice the comfortable heat. Wealthy businessmen urged him to legally patent the amazing stove and make a massive fortune. He completely refused to patent the stove, stating clearly that inventions should serve society freely and without restriction. As he grew older, his natural eyesight slowly began to fail him. He grew terribly tired of constantly switching between two different pairs of glasses for reading and walking. He brilliantly invented bifocal glasses by carefully slicing two distinct lenses perfectly in half. He oversaw the careful, precise grinding of optical glass to fit two distinct lenses into a single wire frame. His endless curiosity even extended to the deep, vast oceans. He noticed that mail ships sailing from England to America took weeks longer than merchant ships traveling the exact same route. He meticulously mapped the massive Gulf Stream ocean current to help mail ships cross the Atlantic Ocean much faster. He loved the heavy salt spray and rolling waves of the Atlantic as he dropped deep thermometers into the warm Gulf Stream. He was also a deeply passionate lover of sweet, melodic music. He invented the incredible glass harmonica, a totally unique musical instrument. It was played by gently rubbing wet fingers on a series of rotating glass bowls of different sizes. The delicate, haunting, ethereal hum of wet fingers gliding across spinning glass bowls captivated all of Europe. Legendary composers like Mozart and Beethoven both composed beautiful music specifically for Franklin's glass harmonica. His incredible inventions were always deeply rooted in profound human empathy. He even designed a flexible, comfortable urinary catheter for his older brother, who suffered terribly from painful kidney stones, while his mind constantly sought the quiet order of scientific inquiry. The growing political unrest in the colonies demanded his unique problem-solving skills. Benjamin Franklin could not hide away in his quiet laboratory forever. The complicated, messy world of colonial politics slowly began to pull him into its heavy gravitational orbit. He was officially elected to the Pennsylvania Assembly in 1751, beginning his formal political career. His incredible talent for organization was desperately needed on a much larger continental scale. He served as the busy Deputy Postmaster General for all of North America, starting in 1753. He did not simply sit comfortably in a quiet office to manage the massive postal network. He personally surveyed the rough, overgrown postal routes, traveling thousands of miles by horseback. He listened to the rhythmic clopping of horse hooves on a dusty colonial postal road in the suffocating heat of summer. He vastly improved the speed and deep reliability of communication between the divided, isolated colonies. But dark, terrifying clouds of war were rapidly gathering on the western frontier. The brutal French and Indian War was beginning to violently tear the continent apart. In 1754, he eagerly attended the vital Albany Congress in New York. The immediate goal was to negotiate desperate, necessary treaties with the powerful Native American tribes. He heard the crisp rustle of heavy parchment maps being unrolled on a large wooden table in Albany. Franklin saw a much larger, more profound necessity for the divided American people. At Albany, he boldly proposed the Albany Plan of Union. This was the very first formal proposal to completely unite the American colonies under one single, unified national government. To support his radical vision, he published a deeply famous, provocative political cartoon. It was the legendary Join or Die image featuring a violently severed snake. You could almost hear the harsh scratching of a quill pen drawing the crude, jagged lines of a severed snake cartoon. Each piece of the bloody snake represented a different, isolated American colony. He argued that if they did not join together, they would surely perish alone. Unfortunately, his brilliant, prophetic vision was entirely too far ahead of its time. The Albany Plan was firmly rejected by both the stubborn colonial assemblies and the suspicious British government. They were all far too jealous of their own small, individual powers to unite. Despite this bitter political defeat, he continued to serve his frightened people. He helped efficiently supply British General Edward Braddock's massive, ill-fated military expedition into the wilderness. He used his vast logistical network to gather wagons and crucial food for the marching army. His deep political influence grew exponentially, positioning him as the primary, trusted voice of the American colonies. He often faced the tense, echoing silence of a political assembly hall waiting for him to finally speak. The peaceful citizens of Pennsylvania were growing deeply furious with the wealthy Penn family who legally owned the entire colony. The greedy Penn family completely refused to pay any local taxes to defend the frontier from violent attacks. In 1757, the frustrated Pennsylvania Assembly gave Franklin a massive, incredibly difficult mission. They sent him across the treacherous ocean to London to directly protest the immense, unfair power of the Penn family. He watched the thick, heavy fog rolling into the harbor as he boarded a large wooden ship bound for the very heart of the British Empire. Leaving the familiar, rugged shores of America, Franklin set sail into a complex world of aristocratic intrigue that would severely test his giant intellect and deep patience. It is absolutely fascinating how one man's brilliant mind could map massive ocean currents, safely capture lightning, and draft continental political unions all at once. What do you think was his absolute most impactful, lasting creation? Share your thoughts below. And as the muddy colonial storms gently give way to the highly sophisticated grand salons of Europe, allow yourself to sink deeper into the cushions and completely relax. The muffled ticking of a grandfather clock echoed softly in a quiet London parlor on a rainy afternoon. Benjamin Franklin lived comfortably in a beautiful brick house on Craven Street for nearly 2 decades. He deeply enjoyed the highly sophisticated, incredibly luxurious comforts of British high society. He surrounded himself with brilliant scientists, wealthy aristocrats, and famous philosophers. He was not always a fiery, rebellious revolutionary seeking to destroy the government. For many long years, he believed deeply in the magnificent, vast scope of the powerful British Empire. He proudly considered himself a loyal, dedicated Englishman above all else. He desperately sought peaceful, rational reconciliation between the growing colonies and the ancient mother country. He wanted political unity, deep harmony, and continued prosperity, never a bloody, destructive revolution. He used his immense intellect to bridge the widening, dangerous gap between the two distinct worlds. When the deeply unpopular Stamp Act was passed, the American colonies erupted in violent, furious riots. Franklin traveled to the grand halls of Parliament in 1766 to speak for his angry people. He calmly and successfully argued for the complete, total repeal of the hated, unfair Stamp Act. He used his brilliant, calm logic to expertly sway the wealthy, powerful British lords. For a brief, hopeful moment, it seemed that lasting peace had been entirely restored. But the deep, simmering political tensions across the wide ocean continued to silently grow. He then made a highly controversial, incredibly fateful decision that would alter his entire life. He quietly intercepted and leaked the highly secret, deeply damaging Hutchinson letters to his trusted friends in America. These explosive letters revealed the royal governor of Massachusetts actively calling for a severe reduction of colonial liberties. The sharp, crisp snap of sealing wax being broken on a confidential letter echoed through history. The powerful British government was absolutely furious with the colonial postmaster for exposing their dark secrets. In January of 1774, he was summoned forcefully to answer for his perceived crimes. He was hauled before the powerful, incredibly intimidating British Privy Council. They met in an imposing, highly acoustic room, known ominously to all as the cockpit. You could hear the echoing, suffocating silence in the grand, wood-paneled room of the Privy Council. The brilliant colonial agent stood entirely alone before his arrogant, aristocratic judges. Solicitor General Alexander Wedderburn publicly humiliated and verbally abused the famous inventor for over a full hour. The cruel, biting insults and mocking laughter rained down upon him without any mercy or pause. Franklin stood perfectly still and entirely silent during the entire vicious, agonizing tirade. He wore a heavy, dark woolen suit, absorbing the bitter chill of a damp English winter. He absorbed the harsh, undeniable hatred of the massive empire he had once loved so dearly. He did not utter a single, solitary word in his own defense. But in that quiet, stoic silence, a massive, profound, personal transformation occurred deep within his heart. The deeply painful public humiliation cemented his final, irreversible transformation. He changed from a proud, hopeful British loyalist into a fiercely dedicated, unyielding American patriot. He finally knew that peaceful reconciliation was entirely, completely impossible. Following this terrible, degrading event, he was immediately and unceremoniously fired from his lucrative position as Deputy Postmaster General. He lingered in the hostile city for a short time, carefully tying up his complex business affairs. He finally fled the sprawling, foggy city of London in March of 1775. He knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that a terrible, violent war was now entirely unavoidable. Listen to the solitary sound of carriage wheels rolling away through the foggy London streets toward the docks. Returning to an America already bleeding from the first shots of war, he found himself a patriarch of a dangerous new cause. He endured the long, difficult voyage across the dark, unpredictable Atlantic Ocean. He finally arrived back in the familiar, bustling port of Philadelphia in May of 1775. The American colonies he had left behind were completely and forever changed. He arrived just after the bloody, tragic military battles of Lexington and Concord had ignited the quiet countryside. The heavy, dark smoke of open rebellion was already rising high into the clear colonial sky. He was immediately and unanimously elected to serve in the busy Second Continental Congress. The weary, aging traveler had absolutely no time to rest his aching bones. He immediately faced a deeply personal, incredibly painful tragedy upon his celebrated return. His only living son, a man named William Franklin, was the wealthy royal governor of New Jersey. William remained fiercely, stubbornly loyal to the distant, powerful British crown. He completely refused to join his famous father in the highly dangerous, incredibly risky colonial rebellion. This bitter, deeply personal political divide caused a permanent, incredibly painful rift between them. It was a heartbreaking, tragic estrangement between a deeply loving father and his stubborn, proud son. You could feel the unspoken, heavy sorrow hanging in the air during his final meeting with his estranged son. But the urgent, demanding needs of a brand new, fragile nation required his absolute, undivided focus. Franklin was highly honored to serve on the prestigious, vital Committee of Five. This small, elite group was specifically tasked with drafting the monumental Declaration of Independence. He sat quietly alongside a brilliant, idealistic young lawyer from Virginia named Thomas Jefferson. Imagine the quiet scratching of Thomas Jefferson's quill pen against heavy parchment in a warm, sunlit room. Jefferson wrote the initial, beautiful, and highly poetic draft of the famous historical document. Franklin, the master editor and brilliant writer, made several crucial, incredibly subtle edits to the young man's work. Jefferson had originally written that certain human truths were entirely sacred and undeniable. Franklin gently crossed out those heavily religious, emotional words with his own sharp pen. He brilliantly changed the powerful, enduring phrase to simply read, self-evident. It was a profound, deeply rational shift in the very intellectual foundation of American political thought. The new, independent nation was officially born, but it was incredibly weak, divided, and entirely impoverished. Knowing the fragile colonies desperately needed massive foreign military aid to survive, Congress made a bold request. They urgently dispatched the world-famous inventor to the distant, wealthy kingdom of France. He was already 70 years old and suffering from rapidly failing, unpredictable health. The vital transatlantic voyage in late 1776 was incredibly perilous and deeply terrifying. They faced incredibly harsh, freezing winter storms and the constant, terrifying threat of roaming, heavily armed British warships. Capture meant an automatic, immediate death sentence for high treason against the king. Feel the violent, rhythmic pitching of the wooden ship's cabin in the dark, icy Atlantic storm. The aging, weary diplomat suffered terribly from severe, agonizing bouts of swelling gout. He also developed incredibly painful, burning boils on his sensitive skin during the agonizingly rough sea crossing. He felt the dull, throbbing ache of gout in his weary joints as the cold sea air crept in. It was a miserable, deeply painful, and utterly exhausting journey for a man of his advanced years. But his fierce, burning dedication to the fragile American cause kept him completely alive and deeply focused. He finally arrived safely on the quiet coast of France in December of 1776. He saw the gray, muted light of a freezing morning as the French coastline finally appeared through the thick mist. He was physically exhausted, incredibly weak, and deeply aching in every single joint. But he was entirely ready for his greatest, most important, and highly dramatic theatrical performance. Stepping off the ship, he shed the persona of the English gentleman and carefully crafted a new, captivating image for his foreign hosts. France was a grand, wealthy nation governed by incredibly strict, highly complex rules of aristocratic fashion. The wealthy, powerful French court was filled entirely with heavily powdered wigs, bright silk suits, and glittering jewels. Franklin deliberately chose to play a vastly different, highly calculated, and incredibly brilliant game of image. In Paris, he deliberately dressed in incredibly plain, simple brown woolen suits. He famously wore a simple, rustic marten fur cap upon his entirely unpowdered, balding head. He masterfully played the highly appealing, incredibly popular role of the natural, rustic philosopher from the wild woods. This stark, intentional, and highly visible contrast with the heavily powdered French court was absolutely brilliant. The French aristocracy completely fell in love with his simple, charming, and gentle grandfatherly demeanor. The wealthy French public absolutely adored the famous, gentle American inventor. His gentle, smiling image appeared quickly on beautiful rings, delicate snuff boxes, and grand clocks across the country. Here, the soft rustle of expensive silk dresses brushing past in the mirrored halls of Versailles. See the soft, quiet strokes of a painter's brush capturing his face on a delicate porcelain snuff box. He was unquestionably the most famous, widely celebrated, and deeply beloved man in the entire city of Paris. But beneath this charming, incredibly warm exterior, a brilliant, highly calculating diplomat was constantly at work. He established a highly effective, deeply secret, and incredibly complex intelligence network. He worked quietly and endlessly from a beautiful, calm, and highly secluded suburb called Passy. British spies constantly surrounded his quiet, peaceful home, eagerly watching his every single move. But Franklin cleverly used their constant, annoying presence to his own distinct, brilliant advantage. He routinely allowed them to easily steal highly specific, completely false, and deeply misleading documents. He actively used the enemy's spies to secretly filter brilliant, highly damaging misinformation back to London. Meanwhile, he tirelessly negotiated with the incredibly powerful, highly cautious French foreign minister. This immensely important man was the calculating, highly skeptical Comte de Vergennes. Franklin desperately begged for covert funds, heavy bronze cannons, and necessary weapons for the freezing American army. The soft clinking of fine crystal glasses during whispered negotiations over dinner masked the desperate reality of war. He felt the smooth, luxurious feel of the marten fur cap resting on his head in the winter breeze. The French were incredibly sympathetic, but they naturally feared the massive, terrifying power of the British military. They waited anxiously for a clear, absolute, and undeniable sign that the Americans could actually win battles. That vital, deeply necessary proof finally arrived after the stunning American military victory at Saratoga in 1777. Franklin used this massive, incredibly timely triumph to quickly secure the formal, binding Treaty of Alliance. Signed in 1778, this incredibly crucial treaty finally brought the massive French navy directly into the war. It also provided vital, heavily armed French troops to fight alongside the exhausted, starving American soldiers. It was this exact, highly specific military alliance that ultimately ensured absolute American victory over the British Empire. After the long, incredibly bloody war was finally won, his vital diplomatic duties continued without pause. He was an essential part of the small delegation that brilliantly negotiated the final Treaty of Paris. Signed in 1783, this historic, deeply important treaty officially ended the Revolutionary War. It forced the mighty British Empire to finally recognize total, absolute American independence. He happily remained in France as the beloved, highly respected American ambassador until 1785. He basked in the gentle, warm light of hundreds of beeswax candles illuminating a crowded Parisian salon. He was deeply beloved by the entire French nation, hailed universally as a true living hero of modern liberty. His great work complete, and his body weary from age, the old philosopher finally looked toward the calming shores of home. Benjamin Franklin finally returned to his beloved city of Philadelphia in the late summer of 1785. He had been away from his adopted home for 9 long, incredibly difficult, and highly exhausting years. The deeply grateful city welcomed their greatest citizen with massive, cheering crowds and thunderous cannon salutes. The people deeply loved the old, weary man who had magically saved their fragile, struggling nation. Despite his rapidly failing health and constant, severe physical pain, his public service was still not entirely finished. The grateful people immediately elected the elderly statesman as the highly respected president of Pennsylvania. 2 years later, the fragile, newly independent nation faced a massive, deeply existential, and highly dangerous crisis. The original government was rapidly failing, and a completely new, vastly stronger constitution was desperately needed. In 1787, at the highly advanced age of 81, he attended the vital Constitutional Convention. He was by far the oldest, most experienced, and deeply revered delegate in the highly secretive assembly. His fragile, aching body could no longer handle the jolting, incredibly painful motion of a horse-drawn carriage. So, he was gently carried to the Grand Convention Hall in a beautiful, custom-built, enclosed sedan chair. This unique, comfortable chair was carefully and smoothly carried by trusted prisoners from the local city jail. Feel the gentle, swaying motion of the enclosed sedan chair moving slowly through the warm city streets. He entered the hot, crowded room as a highly revered, almost mythical living legend of the Revolution. Listen to the hushed, respectful silence of the convention hall as the elderly statesman slowly rose to speak. He played a truly crucial, deeply necessary role as a gentle, incredibly wise, and highly patient peacemaker. The younger delegates were bitterly divided, constantly shouting and violently arguing over massive, deeply complex political power. Franklin calmly urged necessary compromise, deep patience, and quiet, genuine humility among the bitterly divided delegates. He gently reminded them that they were building a massive, enduring nation for all time, not just for themselves. On the very final day of the long, incredibly exhausting summer convention, the grand document was finally signed. Franklin sat quietly, looking intently at the large, heavy wooden chair belonging to General George Washington. He noted the beautiful, intricate carving of a sun on the high back of Washington's impressive chair. See the soft, golden sunlight illuminating the half-sun carved into the wooden back of a high chair. He beautifully declared to the quiet, exhausted room that he now knew it was a rising, not a setting sun. His brilliant, immensely productive, and deeply fascinating life was finally drawing to a quiet, inevitable close. But his deep, powerful, and entirely unyielding conscience demanded one final, incredibly important public act. In his final, quiet years, his brilliant mind turned toward the deep, unforgivable moral tragedy of human bondage. He became the deeply passionate, highly vocal president of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. He deeply believed that true, genuine liberty must belong to absolutely every single person living in America. His very last public political act was bravely petitioning the new National Congress in 1790. He formally demanded that they completely and immediately abolish the cruel, entirely wicked institution of human slavery. He heard the quiet scratching of his final signature on parchment, his old hand trembling slightly with advanced age. Benjamin Franklin passed away quietly and peacefully at his comfortable home on April 17, 1790. He was exactly 84 years old when his grand, beautifully complex journey finally ended in quiet rest. The entire, deeply grieving city wept for the immense, entirely irreplaceable loss of their absolute greatest mind. Over 20,000 mourning people slowly attended his solemn, deeply respectful, and highly emotional funeral procession. It was the absolute largest public gathering in the entire history of Philadelphia at that precise time. Listen to the deep, solemn tolling of church bells ringing slowly across the quiet rooftops of Philadelphia. The narrative concludes his mortal journey, transitioning smoothly into a contemplative reflection on the enduring echoes of his mind. As the church bells of Philadelphia faded into the quiet evening of history, the extraordinary, restless life of Benjamin Franklin came to a peaceful rest. He was a runaway apprentice who tamed the skies and a simple printer who reshaped the borders of empires, leaving behind a legacy as brilliant and enduring as the lightning he once chased. It has been a true pleasure sharing this grand story with you tonight. As we transition now from the active story of his life into a calm, scholarly reflection on his lasting impact, I invite you to close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and allow the comforting echoes of the past to carry you gently into the night.